looking through this stuff.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the June 25th, 2018 Law Committee meeting to order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from last month. Has everybody had an opportunity to review these minutes? I know we had a lengthy meeting, discussed a lot of different resolutions. Wow, this is really long. Can I have a second?
Yes.
Second by Mr. Kraus, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, if it's okay with members of the committee, I'd like to start with the current business, item number 21, and then we'll go back to the previous business, just in the effort of getting some of the folks from the executive's office and the members who come to speak on their legislation up to work. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so we'll start with item number 21, resolution number 281, amending legislative rules of order regarding Rule 22. This is Mr. Clay and Ms. McLean Lane. Are they here? No? Okay. They're not here to discuss it, so do I have a motion to table this? So, all in favor? We're going to table number 21. Sponsors are not here to discuss it. Item number 22, resolution 282, sponsored by Mr. Sigarashi. Oh, Ralph, there he is, Mr. Sigarashi.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Good evening, committee.
So, do you want to explain the resolution?
Absolutely.
Answer any questions? Do have members have an opportunity to review it?
It's pretty much straightforward. Looking to create a special committee on business. According to our rules, any special committee that is created has to have a list of 9 members that go before the legislature for approval. And my thoughts on this is that as a legislative body, we do an awful lot that impacts business, and I just figure that having a committee that represents business to wind up having those items or resolutions come before us would wind up being only, I think, is a good move for us. So I look to move this out tonight with a favorable recommendation. If there's any questions, I will be more than happy to try to answer any questions that I can.
Sure, Ms. Cunningham.
Thanks. I think it's a great idea. Any particular reason that you would take the additional step of appointing the members versus having the chairman through the established process appoint the members?
Yeah, good thing. Good question. When I originally drafted the resolution and sent it off, I got a call from our counsel, and our counsel can verify. And as I tried to state earlier, any special committee that goes before has to have the committee filled out for the full legislature to vote on. It's not something that gives the chair and or the majority leader to wind up doing. It's something that it has to go before the full body. That's how I was advised by majority counsel, and I got the phone call right before the individual exchange saying that the committee had to be filled. Because when I originally wrote it, it did not fill. It was just to create it, and then council said it had to be filled. Thus was the case with the elder care when the elder care was created years ago as a special committee. Thus was the case with court facilities years ago, as it was explained to me. So to answer your question, it was upon the advice of our majority council that it had to be filled.
Can I just follow up with that, Ralph? Have you spoken to these 9 members? Have all 9 members agreed to serve on this committee?
That's one thing I put members on. I was just brainstorming. I know I spoke to several of those individuals, and I was waiting for this to come out of committee to wind up, if there's any changes or amendments, we can do that on the floor, but it's more or less having something that winds up going out. But I did speak to the majority of the individuals. I did speak to Mr. Smith, who did not have a problem. I did speak to Mr. Camiso, who did not have a problem. I spoke to Mr. Demowitz, that did not have a problem. I spoke to myself. That was a rather lengthy discussion because, as most of you that know me, it takes me 45 minutes to get to a 2-minute destination. But I did speak to the majority of the members and those that I did not reach. I know it may have come as a surprise, but mostly nobody had a problem with that.
The only other thing I would say too is I really think you need to put a resolve clause in here that the resolution has a term for the members that are on here, because some of these people might choose not to run for re-election or might lose election, and then you've got these people sitting on a legislative committee who are not.
I think that's understood as with any legislative committee, but to make the chair happy, if we could move it out and have our council make that change, that would only be for the term of the body. I would be willing to accept that friendly amendment, and as long as that council says that that's okay, that he can add that in on the amendment, I would be more than happy to move it out with that.
Yeah, I would propose we put that in a second resolved clause, consist of 9 members for a term not to exceed, December 31st, or something. Mr. Carnahan,
I would just, I didn't want to cut you off just on that point. I would just make sure the language is clear that the term for the people is the term and not the committee. So it's your intention that the committee is...
The committee winds up staying on
yes.
for,
Okay.
it's a special committee that we put into our rules, but we wind up having, the term would be for the finish out this term and then reappointed by the chair and the...
Subject to reappointment by the chair
per the
for
rules,
the next legislative session.
Per the rules of the legislature. I agree 100%, and I accept the friendly amendment.
Great.
Anything to wind up getting some of these items off of your agenda.
Ms. Lakakis, did you have a question, or you?
That was my question.
Mr. Mendick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, it's not really a question. As you know, I'm a co-chair of the Rules Task Force, and I am a little perplexed at why the attorney would provide that type of explanation. The rules are very, very clear on these types of special committees, and it clearly states that the special committees will be filled by the chairperson of the county legislature. Nowhere does it state that it has to be done before the concept is put before the committee, and clearly putting it into the resolution itself is contrary to Rule 22 on special committees, and the fact that this was not appointed, these people were not appointed by the chairman, further is in error and in opposition to Rule 22.
I defer to council to answer that question.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So after speaking, I will say Mr. Russell spoke to Mr. Signoracci. I spoke to Mr. Russell. My understanding is that in the creation of these special committees, historically this is how it's been done, as Mr. Signoracci indicated. These members, the members who will be put on it, assuming they're on board, have traditionally been on the resolutions creating the special committees.
Doesn't fit within the rules of the legislature.
I think Mr. Mendick has a fair point. Yeah, that's what the rules say, a resolution can circumvent a rule. Certainly, that's what we want to do. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a.
I think you would have to change the rule in order to circumvent it.
Are you change the rule in order to circumvent? Or notwithstanding, I guess you could say, notwithstanding Rule 22. But I get your point. I think it's well taken.
Amend it, just take the names out. Right.
That's the way that when Mr. Mendick and all, when I submitted it, it had no names.
Okay, well,
so that was
Mr. Bergdorf.
I was just going to make a point that historically, the majority and the minority have had an opportunity to suggest to the chair the members that would represent their body on any committee. So if nobody even asked the minority, who would you like your representatives to be, I mean, our minority leader's right here, he can speak for himself, but I would think that would continue to be a sort of a foundational piece for the legislature. So, perhaps if there are any discussions on amending this, taking names out, if it were to go forward, there would be some consultation between the chair.
Well, that's what the rule says, right?
Well, but people are making, or
So,
suggest,
in light of what Mr. Mendick said, are you open to removing the name so that we comply with the rule, we can move this out tonight?
Absolutely, with, like I said, when I wrote this,
Sure, I totally understand.
I wound up doing it, it was based upon
Yeah.
council that I had to wind up
Okay.
putting names on it, so you can amend it
Great.
with that friendly amendment to remove the names.
Can I
As
just
well
ask a
as-
question about that?
Absolutely.
I support removing the names. I also note that there's no one from Bethlehem represented. I realize you can't have everyone, but we do have very large commercial centers. All three, Bill Reinhardt, Charlie Dawson, and I each represent a commercial center area of our district, so.
Absolutely, as when I got the phone call, it was 10 to 12, and the deadline was at 12 o'clock, so
So
I
can I ask a
rattled off
question, though?
names.
If we strike the names, do we need to make clear who does the appointing?
Then it would follow the rules
the
for
rules.
section
It's in the
22,
rules.
to Mr. Mendick's point.
Okay, so
Then,
based on that, I'd like to make a motion to amend the second resolve clause to delete the names in light of what Mr. Mendick said and move resolution number 282, item number 22, out of committee with a positive recommendation. Is that a second, Mr. Clan?
Yes.
Does everybody understand what's happening?
Yep.
Is everybody okay with it? Is the sponsor okay with it?
Absolutely,
Okay. All in
thank you.
favor on the amended motion, amended resolution moving out of committee?
And that's with both your friendly amendment and the
Yes.
names.
Great.
Perfect.
All right, item number 22 is out. Good discussion. Item number 23, resolution number 284, public hearing on and this is Mr. Drake's, is Mr. Drake here? No, he's not. Okay, we'll table this. Now, item number 24, resolution number 285. This is the reapportionment and redistricting local law. This is the public hearing on said local law. It's simply the public hearing notice. Does anybody have any questions on this? Can I have a motion? Mr. Feeney, second by Mr. Carnahan, all in favor? Aye. Alright, so we'll have a public hearing on local law number O, the redistricting law, which there's a lot of members talking about. It seems like it's moving in the right direction.
A date, please, a date.
A date, yeah,
July
the date
24th.
July 24th.
is July 24th.
Mr. Chair, can I also be added to 285?
Sure.
Yes,
You
me
wanna be on the
too.
local law too?
I think I already am.
Okay,
I believe I have to be on the local law and this too.
okay.
Possible.
Kevin, can you add Mr. Carnahan?
Yeah,
me too. And Mr. Funk.
and myself, please.
Okay, Mr. Bergdorf and Mr. Potsky. All, anybody else?
Anybody not wanting to
That's me.
Mr. Feeney, great, so this is really, there's great stuff.
rock and roll?
Okay, look, item number 25 is local law. Oh, I would suggest we table this pending the public hearing and get into responses.
I am on that one, I see. So if we did move
Okay.
around.
Do we want
Can I have a motion to table item number 25? Mr. Feeney, seconded by Mr. Kraus, all in favor? Sorry, Ms.
No, I just want to, can I say something? about
Yeah,
it?
sure, I'm zipping right along here.
Yeah, no, I know you are. I just want to make a comment about this.
Okay.
The three of us, really, starting with Mr. Kraus and I, worked for a couple of years on trying to take the two different redistricting approaches and put them together. And this is the product of that. Wanda came in sort of at the end and did a lot of hard work to kind of fine tune and things and also think about sequencing and timeframes. And one thing I do want to draw attention to, there's a lot of language in here, and it's in some of the subsequent, toward the end, letters. But a lot of language I would draw your attention to that is regarding transparency, public hearing process, minutes, accountability, information on the website, feedback, inviting the public's input in. We labored over including that type of language to make sure that this was a process that was very much in the public domain, that there was a lot of discussion, a lot of dialogue, that the instructions to the commission as well as the MMD subcommittee, reapportionment subcommittee, which works in tandem with the commission, the reapportionment commission, would be required by the outlines of this public law or local law to bend over backwards to do that kind of outreach and information sharing and public engagement. So So I would draw your attention to that because I know that was a key concern and issue in some of the litigation, the opinions regarding that. But it's really important, and I also would say that, I think we were successful at marrying some of the key provisions and some of the kind of threshold issues that were important in local law V as well as in local law W. And please look for outreach from me and Mr. Kraus and Ms. Willingham. We want to roll up our sleeves, use the momentum of the 2-year process, and invite people's comments. So if there's any kind of comment that anybody has in the public who's listening to the meeting today, as well as any member of the legislature, we would invite your careful read and your ideas and thoughts about how to take this and improve it and build on the momentum we have and aim for moving this quickly through our process, but having a very thoughtful discussion about that.
Mr. Kraus, did you have anything to add as another sponsor? And then...
No, I think Ms. Cunningham represented us well in this effort, and we really do wish to have input from everyone involved, both members of the legislature and the public. This is a positive issue.
Great.
And
wonderful. Mr. Berko?
Is this the version of law that you had circulated most recently with the amendments? So when we go to public hearing, this becomes the base for which any changes that might come out after the public hearing.
And there will be some changes, that's my understanding.
And I actually have drafted some technical amendments. Since we already tabled it, I think it's fine. We'll kind of keep this for subsequent.
Did you pass them out?
No, I didn't pass them out. I have them in front of me.
Sure. So why don't we pass them out to the members just so that folks have it, they can review it prior to the public hearing.
Because that was really sort of my question, is there, are any of these going to be of the stature for amendments that would require a second public hearing?
Well, I guess we'll wait and see. I think our intent is to listen carefully to all of the comments and thoughts that people have, and have a good deliberation about those. What I passed out, and since we tabled it, we'll obviously address these amendments at a later point. But these changes, one is just a true missing comma. But the other 2 changes were actually given by a colleague and also an outside organization that read the local law and wanted to give some ideas. So, this kind of shows the spirit of what we're aiming to do. But I would say that we would love to have you look quickly at this. We really do want to build on some momentum, and as Wanda said, there's a lot of attention focused on this issue right now. So let's keep it going, let's build on momentum, let's aim for a November deadline, but let's not be worried about that if we want to have a stretched out timeframe.
Yeah. So, everybody review these. There's more amendments that could be substantive. We don't know. Kevin's got some suggestions. Other members have suggestions they brought to the sponsors. So we'll continue to go through the process here with the hope to try to get it out as quickly as we can after a diligent review. Great. So let's move now to previous business. Mr. Signoracci's here. He's got some items on the agenda. Mr. Miller's here. He's got some items on the agenda. Mr. Bullock is also here. He's got some stuff on here. So I'd like to get the members who are here kind of group their stuff together and then get them on their merry way. That's all right with the members of the committee.
Actually, thank you for doing that, because I sat here at Audit and Finance an hour 45 minutes.
Yeah. So we'll
to make no comment on legislation, so thank you.
Folks here, and they have things on the agenda, then we'll come out. So let's take up item number 1. This is resolution number 79.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There's a handout for this.
There's a handout. I'm going to table this because the handout that's coming in is fresh. The resolution was amended and changed a little bit. So once this gets passed out, I do want to table item number 1 at the request of the sponsor.
Do you want to take us through the amendments, Mr. Signoracci?
I'll just let everybody kind of go through it, please.
Okay, sure. Well, that being said, we'll pass this out to the members of the committee and the legislators who are here. Take a look at it, review it, and I guess we'll table this at the request of the sponsor and see what next month brings. Okay? Can I have a motion to item number? Yes.
I'm sorry. couple times, I think we've requested data about contracts that have been awarded in the past years.
Yes, well, you got the sponsors right there, so.
I don't have the data. I know that you requested that from OGS, and whether the executive's office provided that after the last meeting, I'm not, I don't know if they provided it to you or not, but that wasn't something that was requested of me to get, so.
Are you making that
ask
request,
to get
Ms.
it.
Platsky?
Yes.
So you're
I'd like to
making
renew
it,
my request to please provide data, contracts that have been awarded now between the $200,000 amount and the $250,000 amount in the past years, and what businesses they've been to and if they've been MWBE businesses.
Respectfully, that's not legislative info. I think any member is just as able to call the executive's office as any other. So respectfully, I would say that any member can do that. They need that information to make an informed decision.
Mr. McLaughlin, from the county executive's office, would you like to chime in on this request?
Well, I don't have the data either, but I'll see if I can get the data for
Can you get the data? Can you get it for us for next month?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Fine.
McLaughlin.
Yeah, Mr. Signoraci, I noticed the entire legislation is underlined, so that means
it's changed from the original. So what was submitted in as, originally it was all changed, and that's the new language. So as I said, I tabled it, everybody read it, because it's pretty much a new version.
All right.
It's completely new, so you just
Underline the whole thing.
Okay.
Okay, great. So
Excuse
now-
me.
Yes, Mr. Burdorf.
I have to ask, the whole purpose of underlining is so that you can go to the existing law and you can see precisely what has changed.
Track the changes.
So you can track the change. If everybody were to submit every piece of legislation in this format, nobody would know what was new and what was old on any piece that we ever do. This was not the intent of requesting underlining. Our staff did an underlined version of the original version. We gave it to council. We asked them to check it and to see if it was an adequate representation. But shouldn't that be the responsibility of the council to get it into a format that complies with our rules?
That's a good point. Mr. Signoraci.
That's why it's tabled, Mr. Bergdorf.
Because we can't see the difference.
One of the reasons why, and we'll work on it. So there were changes, as I told you, from last month, so.
Well, he's tabling it, so. I mean,
Okay,
that is a
well,
fair
I
point.
just, before it gets
Should we read it or
considered
not?
next month,
You would like to see it.
I would like to see it in that format because there is language that changed in the terms of what is a construction contract, okay?
And you want to see what the current county
I want to see what
policy
the
is.
current policy is, and I want to see what the new policy would be.
Okay.
And I would like the county attorney to tell us how the county executive is going to administer this. What new changes would require this.
Well, why don't we do this? We'll let Mr. Signoraci, he's provided the substantive language to all the members so they can read it, what he's proposing.
Okay, I appreciate that.
We'll table it for now. We'll let him work on that, and next month, we'll work on getting the county attorney to come here to either address, I've asked him to come to the last two meetings, he's had other obligations, while we renew this request a third time, to hopefully come and speak to this, and if we can't get him to speak on it, we'll request an opinion on your underlying issue. Is that okay?
Absolutely fine.
Okay. That means, Mr. Cunningham.
Just a quick clarification, what are we bringing the county attorney in for?
It's Mr. Bergdorf's request, it's not mine.
I'd be delighted to explain that to you.
Okay.
Today.
You are writing a law that says the term construction contract. You may mean something by construction contract. I want to know how the county attorney, how the county is going to interpret construction contract. Is it going to be contracts of the land bank? Is it going to be contracts of the Industrial Development Agency? Is it going to be third-party contracts to vendors that have to do potential construction in relation to a grant? So this goes far beyond traditional bidding and what we know construction to be. and it can potentially go into other areas. Since there is new language, I think it behooves us to know how the people who are going to administer that perceive the language. That's my reason.
I get that, and it makes sense. I don't want to cross over into a concern that I've had consistently, that the county attorney does not have the ability to come here and say, this is interpreted a certain way, we're only going to act on this a certain way. To essentially act as a veto, because that's a separation of powers issue. And as long as we're clarifying, that's fine. If we're giving the county attorney, or essentially giving the executive a second shot at a veto, I think that's problematic.
That is not my intent. I want to make sure we all know how we're expanding this law.
Okay. All right, so we'll cross that bridge next month. That being said, can I have a motion to table this?
We got it.
Seconded by Mr. Cumming and seconded by Mr. Feeny. All in favor? Aye. So item number 1 is tabled. We're going to move to item number 3 since Mr. Signoraci is here right now. Resolution number 133, amending the Albany County Legislative Rules of Order and disbanding the Special Committee on Elder Care. Mr. Signoraci, you want to go over this one?
Yes, this resolution put forth a few months ago, looking to move this out with a favorable recommendation, trying to streamline the process. As you know, a few moments ago I was just up here with the creation of a committee on small business, looking over the rules, and we have several things that are out there, such as downsizing, shrinking our membership. One of the things I wanted to do is streamline our committees. We have a committee that's on core facilities that has not met. We have a committee on the Times Union Center that has 2 or 3 items a month. Tonight was their regularly scheduled meeting, and as everybody knows, that there's no meeting. So what I'm looking to do is to wind up taking 3 committees, wind up merging them together and having a county facilities, buildings, bridges, and roads that encompasses everything, because currently you have public works that winds up having the hockey facility, the sewer treatment plant, so on and so forth. So trying to take all of the bricks and mortar, trying to unify it all under one with the creation of a new committee. And again, that would wind up, as my original intent, that would be up to the chairman and the majority leader to wind up, and the minority leader to wind up putting on the various people on the committees. So I'm looking to wind up making a rule change to wind up creating 1 committee and trying to alleviate 2.
I don't have a problem moving this out of the law committee, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that this is really an issue that's much more appropriate for the rules reform task force that's going through all these issues.
We just, Chairman, we just had one that was passed out for favorable recommendation that this body did a half-hour ago on the creation of a special committee on business. Last month we had one that was passed out that
I don't think we should be dealing with any of them, quite frankly.
Understood.
All these rules that are on here, I mean, that's my personal opinion. Mr. Mendick, you're on that task force.
Yes, sir.
You sound like you have something to say on this.
Well, I do. There really are 2 parts to this resolution, and I applaud Mr. Signoraci for the first part, and that is he has identified 2 committees, the Elder Care Committee and the courthouse, that have not met, and it seems reasonable to disband those. But as you point out, we that is the task force, the Rules Task Force, have been charged by the chairman of looking at the composition of the different committees in an effort to bring things together, to make them more homogeneous as much as possible. The other thing that's important, though, and this committee is not aware of it, but there is a concept that I have discussed with both the majority leader, the minority leader, and the chairman that has to do with the whole committee structure and the number of people in the committee and how many committees we have that will in an attempt to try to make the committee assignments, chairmanships, as reasonable and as bipartisan as we can come up with, in a very reasonable manner. So that's all kind of in flux right now. So that if we start taking pieces apart now, it kind of disturbs that train a little bit.
I didn't know you were doing that stuff. I mean, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, in fact, the intent is that this month that that the task force will be putting out a resolution to change the laws to looking at that committee structure, how many members there are, how they're selected, that type of thing.
Okay, Mr.
In all due respect, I know that you made mention of the task force. Was that task force ever passed out of any of the committees for full membership? Because I think there's only 1, 2, maybe 3 on some of those. Again, going back to the rules, the task force need to wind up having legislative approval to wind up actually making them task forces. So that wasn't even done. So technically, the task forces that are there don't even exist. But that's a whole nother point that I'm not going. So regardless of that, I am looking for this to wind up being moved out to the floor for the full legislature to wind up deciding. And it's upon, I would like to go out with the positive recommendation. If it doesn't get a positive recommendation, still want to move the bill out.
Okay, do members have any, Mr. Clan, did you have a question?
I would make a motion, defer to questions, obviously.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Signoracci? I mean, it's a pretty significant change. Obviously, it's a internal change, you know, to us.
If your committee your committee doesn't have any questions.
By all means, Mr. Moriarty.
All right, I would just like to make a quick comment into Mr. Signoracci's case. Yes, there are some committees that don't meet very often and probably could be disbanded or absorbed into other committees. I'm presently chairman of the Civic Center Committee, and I know this is one of the committees that's affected in this bill. And when I look at this, this committee, it's only met once this year, so I can understand where maybe we want to consolidate Civic Center into another committee. But quite often what the Civic Center Committee does is they approve contracts, whether they be vendor contracts to sell their merchandise or their food in the Civic Center, or they approve lease agreements with tenants for suites. So I think Civic Center, if that was going to be absorbed into another committee, probably would be best served if we went to Item Finance and not to this committee. This type of Roads and Bridges Committee, I don't think is the appropriate place for Civic Center. So I think we need to take a look at this and maybe even give the Rules Committee another opportunity to submit something. And I mean, to table this for a month isn't going to be a very long period of time. So, you know, that's a suggestion I have, and I think Civic Center, if it were to be absorbed into another committee, would be better to go to Audit Finance.
Do you have a response, Mr. Senator?
I do. If you look at Public Works, I'm sure that Mr. Bergdorf could wind up telling you, and as I was a member on for 2 years, you wind up having paving contracts, you have striping contracts, you have a whole host of things. So are you saying in that same breath that everything should wind up going from Public Works also to Audit and Finance?
No, I'm saying...
I'm just trying to get, because I understand that you're saying that it has a fiscal, but so doesn't the other aspect. But that is a building, and the majority of the buildings that are under Public Works, with the exception of the Times Union Center court facilities and a nursing home, the elder care, all wind up have various committees. Trying to put them all under one shelf and have the chairman and the majority leader wind up picking the committees or keeping Public Works, whatever leadership decides to do is on them. But it's, if you're going to wind up having something and you're going to structure it and you're going to say, move all of the buildings under one, then you move all of the buildings under one. Each aspect has various things that could all wind up going under Audit and Finance. You could have one committee that technically winds up dealing with that.
Well,
but those are vendors that you wind up doing for sorry, I just kind of wait for them to.
Can I make a suggestion too? I mean, the one issue that I have, I guess it's not an issue, it's more of a concern, is that there's no effective date on this. We're right in the middle of year 3 of our 4-year term. You know, if we pass it next month, all of a sudden we're going to have a change right in the middle. I think we should put an effective date that the resolution, you know, passes and it's effective, you know, when the rules are readopted January at the organizational meeting, January 2020. when's the next legislature be set?
Yeah.
I
You know
would
what I
take
mean?
that into consideration.
January
I will
1,
speak with council about that, because
You
that
know what I
would-
mean? I mean, that's my issue, is we're disrupting
Okay.
right in the middle. I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea. I just think to change it right now in the middle of year 3. If we had done it before we readopted the rules this past January, you know, that probably would have been appropriate too, but now we're in year 3 of a 2-year fixed term. So that's my personal suggestion on that issue.
So let me ask a question. If we have a change when we adopt any other rules to our, and we make any other changes to our rules, are we gonna wind up waiting till 2020 or in 2 years? I just want to be on the same page and be on the same tape that when the task force that winds up coming up with rules changes, that their rules are gonna wind up being changed in 2020.
Well, I can't speak for Mr. Medic,
So I just-
he's working, I'm just telling you, this is my personal opinion.
So is that gonna be your same opinion going on their rule changes?
I mean, probably, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to get that out there on record. Thank you.
You know?
So I'll table this for,
Well, I'm not asking you to table it if you
Well, I'll
want.
table it. You bring up a good point. I'll,
I mean, we could put an amendment in it now that says that if you want. I mean, Mr. Bergdorf, you had a question, right?
No, I was just going to suggest that I'm hearing a couple of times that there are discussions going on between the majority leader, the minority leader, and the chairman. The Rules Committee has actually made a presentation to the majority leader, the minority leader, and the chairman. This seems like something that is of a global nature that probably should be subject to those types of discussions as well. And if, you know, with a 30-day hold and to look at the date of an enactment and stuff, it seems to make sense to give people who are focused solely on this an opportunity to make a case.
I mean, Mr.
Okay with
Signorachi,
tabling,
he's
right?
interested.
okay, I made the motion on the table. I don't know if we, you know, as a sponsor, I don't know if we need a motion from the.
No, it's your,
Because we did that 2
yeah,
times.
we could do that. I'm interested just, you know, what are folks, do people have more questions?
Absolutely.
Mr. Kraus?
Given the nature of the discussion tonight, and there are so many questions, so many of them unanswered, and I applaud your initiative in taking this on, but listening to some of the things Mr. Mendick had to say as well, I think this just hasn't reached the point
Absolutely.
where we need to move forward on it. There's no pressing need to do this, so I would think some more discussion, especially when we adopt it, the timeline. So
I'm good with tabling it for another,
that's great.
for another month.
Okay.
All right, so we'll table item number 3 at the sponsor's request. Mr. Signorachi, you also have item number 10?
13.
13. So we'll move to item number 13.
As with any legislative piece of legislation, you want to move it out, so I also ask for this with a favorable recommendation. The gist of Resolution 234, right now, everybody knows that we have an individual deadline as a legislator for the resolutions that we sponsor, which is 10 days, approximately 10 days prior to the legislative meeting. It gets on the agenda, the chairman winds up taking the items, moves them to various committees. Then we wind up going through, they go on those committee agendas, then you wind up having the RLA process that the county executive has. I'm not looking to try to take any power away from anybody, from the chairman, from the majority council, or anybody that, minority council that sets the agenda. What I'm looking to do is to give legislators the opportunity, if they so desire, to wind up introducing legislation on the RLA deadline, so that if they put it in for the deadline, which is the Wednesday after the Monday meeting, barring holidays, that items can wind up by working with the majority council in the chairman's office, get those items onto committee agendas that we have this evening, that if the committee is so inclined that they can wind up moving them out. This is wind up trying to take a process that can wind up being cumbersome in a 45-day process and wind up giving the legislators the same as the executive to try to get things out in 30 days or less. Granted, some committees may have questions, some things may wind up being held up, but you also are giving legislators the opportunity to get things out onto the floor and voted on quicker. And they're also vetted, and it also gives them an area to wind up getting vetted, because there are occasions where things wind up going on that we vote on that don't go to committee, and it's just gets put on the agenda with the individual deadline. And instead of going to committee, sometimes we vote on it, but this gives everybody the time to wind up reviewing that legislation. If those are the cases, and some things you can vote on. So it's, not limiting, not taking away the deadline that's 10 days before. All it is giving the legislative body, the opportunity, if we so desire, to have things submitted through the same process that it is now, the opportunity to get things on the agenda for the RLA process in that cycle. So it's just giving us 2 ends. Do we want to put it on 10 days before the meeting, or do we want to try to get things through?
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Mendick, then Mr. Kraus? Mr. Mendick, are you on the committee?
I'm not on the committee, so.
Mr. Kraus, then Mr. Mendick.
Mr. Signoraci, would you just run through a scenario of how this would work time-wise?
Certainly. So we have a meeting on Monday, July, 11th? 9th. So by Wednesday at 12 o'clock, if memory serves me right, I don't have the rules in front of me, 12 o'clock on Wednesday, on the 11th, RLA submissions would be due, that the executive in his office would wind up presenting to Majority Council, the Chair's office, and the Minority's office. So if this was enacted, Legislator Kraus can wind up submitting a resolution to those individuals by that 12 o'clock deadline, and they can take that resolution and they can say, okay, this belongs in audit and finance, or this belongs in health, or this belongs here. And it can wind up going through that process. And you can wind up having it voted on within 30 days, because in 30 days you would have the August meeting. So it would have already went through the whole process. Another example, if there's a local law, and granted that the local law is in good order, you have a public comment, and you also have the local law itself. So if you wind up putting it through on this RLA deadline, the committee could wind up taking local law O, if it was put in after the June meeting on that deadline. They could have passed out that public hearing notice. Whereas when it went in last month, it went in 10 days before, it winds up going through the whole thing. So you can wind up putting things in kind of either speed tracking and or getting some legislation out that, if everybody's in favor of it. I believe I sent out a resolution which is going to hit audit and finance on Wednesday about sales tax. It seemed that there's 20, 25 people, I lost count, that wanted to redo the sales tax. Well, instead of going through and having the chairman wind up putting it to audit and finance, which he did, you can wind up having it go in as an individual on that deadline. It could have already went through audit and finance, and it could wind up being last month, and it could wind up being out to vote on by the full legislature.
Would anything prevent, I just want to follow up on that, would anything prevent the chairman at the subsequent meeting, when this bill could now be considered, would anything prevent him from saying, I'm sending it back to committee?
Absolutely not. The chairman has the sole discretion to wind up moving things in and out of committee as he deems necessary as the parliamentarian of our legislature.
I understand
that is his right.
Mr. Bergdorf and Mr. Fine.
Just a question, process issue. So if you put it in, and it goes in the day that all the RLAs go in,
correct,
who is the decision point for what committee it goes to?
What is currently, what is it? No change.
The chair.
So it is the chair and the majority council.
Yeah.
Well, is it the chair or the majority council?
They both work in tandem.
Well, actually, at the legislative meetings, the chair makes a determination what committee it goes to.
Correct. So the RLA process that is done through the majority council with the chair's insight that they put things into various committees. So nothing would wind up changing.
I think the chair is still gonna,
The chair is still gonna wind up
rules
having-
provide that power to the chair.
To the chair. And if,
So,
and if somebody tries to do something funny, and they wind up trying to put it in, and I'm
Well,
just trying to speak
no,
up.
I'm trying to understand, because it's very clear to me at a legislative meeting, when the chair gets up and says, Bergdorf, an act to name a street Y, that's gonna go to
Absolutely.
Public Works, okay? So it's clear to me that that's the chair's determination. Now, what staff work goes on behind the scenes, that's one thing. However, I would hate, I'm trying to understand if it is still 100, is it the chair's determination?
I think that's what the legislative rules of order call for. And I don't, his resolution's not gonna change that.
I'm not looking to change.
Okay, I'm
It's
just.
not, the chair, when he formally says this is going here, this is going there, it's him formally saying at the meeting. But ultimately, he reserves that right. I personally don't see that changing here.
And he's guided by counsel on
And he's got, and as
That's
somebody
just- No, but
that,
I see your point. It's not a concern for me.
as one of the people that have the unique,
I get your,
position of actually working in the legislature and being a legislator,
Yep.
and working in the chairman's office, I know that when the RLAs were sent to the chairman's office, and working with majority council and going over all of those, that was something that the chairman and the majority council worked in conjunction with. But because the majority council is what's in the charter and the rules, that's who, where they operated out of. But it is, always was, and I'm not looking to take away anything. All I'm trying to do is to provide legislators with the opportunity to try to put something in to fast track and get something out within 30 days.
I'm just having a hard time thinking why we wouldn't love this. It gives you two opportunities, and the chair still controls where it's going to be referred. It just offers an expedited process. I mean, I think it brings us into a little bit more of a modern system when you have kind of two input mechanisms to, introduce things. I'm trying to figure out if there's an angle. Maybe Mr. Mendick has a cautionary note, but this seems like a no-brainer to me.
Mr. Mendick, what, you seem to want to chime in?
Well, first of all, I'd like to applaud Mr. Signoraci. I actually have a couple of items on the agenda tonight to try to move things along a little bit faster, so, I'm on the same team on this. My sole concern is that it's from a staff position and how they're going to handle this. As they're gearing up for the legislative meeting and all the things that they have to do there, then they immediately move right into the RLA process, and now we're throwing on top getting the resolutions and the local laws all within a very short time frame. Now it's a spread out a little more throughout the month, but I have a concern that may really inundate the staff and might be tough to handle that workload.
I just don't see it being, I don't share that opinion respectfully. I don't see it. That's just my own 2 cents. I don't see how many members would really even take advantage of this. It's just another tool in there, but that is something that I think certainly you can make note of.
I'll even take the amendment, put an amendment on if this is too cumbersome for legislative staff, that we wind up looking at trying to re-examine this in 6 months.
Okay, so.
And that's something that,
well,
to have staff in majority council, chairman, minority council, or majority officers, that if this is too much, that everybody gets inundated, that we review it in 6 months, and if it is something that's in 6 months, I'll wind up looking at having it removed.
Sure, all right, so we'll add another resolve clause in here at the request of the sponsor to address what Mr. Mendick is raising here. It will say something along the lines of, and be it further resolved, that,
This policy shall be evaluated in 6
Yeah.
months.
Re-examined in 6 months, whatever legally is that council wishes to use. Is that okay with you, Mr. Mendick?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's fine.
So
And I
what
think all of our
Yeah.
resolutions should have that we review everything in 6 months if on a
all right, so
basis.
this is an amendment from the sponsor to add another resolve clause to this resolution, allowing a review after 6 months. to see if the policy is having some sort of an adverse effect on staff as far as processing. Is everybody okay with that? I have a motion to accept the amendment, seconded by Mrs. Cunningham, seconded by Mr. Bergdorf. All in favor?
Aye.
I have a motion to pass out item number 13 with a positive recommendation with the amendment. Mr. Clanahan, seconded by Mr. Feeney. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item 13 is out. If we can now, as crazy as it sounds, go back to item number 2 is mine, it's being withdrawn and my request, so that's gone now permanently. Item number 3, we did, item number 4 is Mr. Bullock, this is the paid sick time. Bill, you're here, and then we're going to
Paid
Mr.
sick
Miller.
time.
You're next, okay?
Forced paid sick time.
Mr. Bullock has an amendment to this bill. Did you pass it out to everybody?
I didn't have enough to pass it out, so I'd like to
Okay,
explain.
I have an amendment that Doug has provided to me for the paid sick days bill to amend section 4A3. It's a markup and deletion. Has it been given to you?
No, I've
Have you
not
seen
seen
it?
this.
Sure.
I got another copy here if you want.
So,
Mr. Chairman?
Pass it.
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but since we don't have copies of this, and I think most of us do like to take into consideration,
Yes.
could we suggest that perhaps we table this until we've all had an opportunity to digest your amendment and your amendment?
I believe that was Mr. Bullock's intent, wasn't it?
My intent is to have this amendment voted on tonight.
Well, we can, I mean, you're the sponsor of the bill, you can amend it at any time.
Yeah.
That's your prerogative, so.
It's kind of simple, I mean.
Sure, I mean, do you wanna just speak on it real quick? Why don't you make some amendment, make some copies of it? Just so everybody has it, but we're gonna tape,
You gotta make
we don't need a motion
Yeah, make copies
for
everybody.
Mr. Bullock to amend his local law.
All you gotta do is follow along on the local law.
But why don't, can you
Under
walk us
section-
through it?
Yeah. Under,
I'd like to wait until I have a copy in writing, please.
Alright, if that's the case, while we're waiting for the copies, just to keep things moving, let's move to item number 10. This is Mr. Miller's local law, number I, he's been waiting patiently over there. Let's see if we can get him out the door.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to request that the public hearing on this, I'd like to request to be moved out to full legislative approval.
I have some questions for you, Mr. Miller. Can you come up to the table?
Certainly.
Do you have the fiscal impact statement on this local law?
There is no fiscal impact because it's under $5,000. There's a $1,000 training requirement for it, and the state chiefs are going to provide that training, so there'll be no impact on the county.
Who's going to enforce this?
It'll be enforced by the locals.
Have they weighed in on the bill? Have local municipalities weighed in on whether or not?
The only input I got was from Green Island, not any input from any other localities.
Are they aware of it? I mean, I know we had a public hearing on it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's been out there for a while, so.
That's also true. Mr. Clanahan?
Just as a follow-up on that, local enforcement, is that local fire districts
No,
or local code offices?
Code enforcement.
Okay.
So, Mr. Bergdorf?
There is a section in this bill which says that if a local government does not implement the law, that the Albany County Department of Public Works implements it. Okay, so DPW. Now, so for example, if one of the major towns or cities did not implement this, did not want to add a mandatory category for sprinklers in new housing, it would create a whole new mandate for county government. And I don't know that we are in the residential building code inspection business, and I just find it hard to believe that we could pass something like this and say that there are no financial implications.
Well, it's going to go back to locality, Mr. Berg.
Does it say it's billed back to locality?
Yes, that's what you know.
Where did?
Right, that same section you talked about.
Mr. Fine, you had a question?
Right here. Yeah, just on what Mr. Bergdorf was saying, I kind of have a concern about billing it back to the locality. We're passing a law, and then we're just saying, municipalities have to go along with it, and if they don't, we're gonna charge them for it to implement it. It seems like we pass a law, we should pay for the enforcement.
Aren't they already doing code enforcement
Yeah, they are.
when there's new construction anyway?
They are.
This version doesn't have a section, there's an offset in this, it's not in there.
What do you mean there's a version?
There's an offset, this version on the enforcement, there's supposed to be an offset in here. It's not in there.
Did you submit it to the council's
Yes,
office?
I did, over a month ago.
It's in the one I have.
It's in the one.
Where it is.
It's in the agenda, yeah.
Okay, you got it.
Should vote for technology.
Section 7.
What, the agenda?
No, I'm sorry, section 3.
Okay, good.
So,
Deduct the cost of this enforcement. Sales tax receipts.
Yeah, as mentioned before, I mean, the localities are already doing enforcement, code enforcement, so my hope is that they would take on this responsibility without, any controversy, but that's, if it doesn't, then we put that provision in there so that the county doesn't incur those expenses.
The regulations in section 3, what specifically are you anticipating that they would address?
The NFPA 13D standard you're talking about?
Under sub D here, that the DPW is going to issue regulations needed for enactment of this law.
That would be the same, the 13D standards that are required from under NFPA.
The specifics of where they go in the building and pressure required, yeah.
So DPW is going to be now in the regulatory business as well? They're going to adopt regulations? I guess
That's possible. My hope is that it wouldn't occur, but it's possible.
But there's no staff there that does that. So are you proposing staff to do that?
Well, then, at that point in time, we'd have to consider that, but.
Well, I mean, I think we need to consider that if we say they're going to have to do it, we ought to.
There's not a lot of enforcement required because they have to provide in third-party independent inspection, so it's not.
They have other inspection duties also, so you're saying they can take this on also?
I would think so. And this is if there are additional costs, then we'd have to, they would be covered by the localities that didn't implement.
Are there any other municipalities that have enacted a similar local law to this?
Yes, there are down Westchester County and.
Countywide or just?
Townwise and
which one?
the state of Maryland.
That's a state.
No. Yeah, but.
Paul, does anybody else do the chargeback thing that you're talking about currently?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And this is still pending in audit and finance, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, and Paul, I think you're well intended with this. I don't think it addresses where the real problem is, not in new construction, but in older homes where most of the fires take place, where most of the fatalities take place, not in new construction. I think it adds a burden to the homeowner who wants to have a new home. As far as Mr. Fine's comment, to me, paragraph D under section 3, it sounds like a mandate. And it's one thing that we try to fight against here is being mandated by doing things by state government and then saying, hey, you got to come up with the money for it. I can't believe that this is the right way for us to go. And deducting the cost of the enforcement from the sales tax receipts due to the municipality. I mean, I don't think that's a fair way to approach it. I think it's heavy-handed. And, I can't support this type of legislation. And it's not because I don't think you're well-intentioned, I think you are. But I think this misses the mark of where the real problem is when it comes to fire safety in this state. And it's not in brand new construction. It's in older construction.
Ms. Cunningham?
I have thought a lot about this, and I would like to be added as a co-sponsor. And a couple of thoughts related to that. Paul knows this, my daughter is a fire protective engineer. There is an enormous body of research going on, and fire protection engineers is a growing, burgeoning field, and in 10 years, at every major engineering school, you're going to see fire protection engineers because they're focused on exactly this type of not just public policy, but also building design, material design, other things that will reduce the incidence of fire. I think the data that was shared at the public hearing by the Firefighters Association indicated that fires in new construction is a pressing problem and is in fact where the bulk of the fatalities and the fires occur because of the way that open floor plans and other things. That's what they said. It was kind of surprising to me, but when I checked with my daughter who's studying engineering, she also indicated that that's in fact what they're taught at in her engineering program. So I'd like to be a sponsor. I will say that, this is tough. I don't think that this subsection D, I don't think it's quite as complicated as we're making it out to be. Municipalities are already doing code inspection. What they're going to do is look at what the industry standards are with respect to this and probably adopt them. Some states and municipalities have already done this. I think that we, by enacting this, are leading Albany County, and I also think in 10 years this is going to be an industry standard in new construction. We're seeing a decline in individuals who are willing to put their lives on the line, not just in firefighting, but other emergency personnel areas, police officers. We're facing a lot of demographic changes where we're seeing an aging out. This is one more thing we can do that accomplishes a response to that reality. But mostly, I just think this is going to be an industry standard, and in 10 years we're going to see this everywhere. And we're going to be the county that led the charge, and New York State are one of them. So I appreciate your work on this.
Ms. Plosky, then Mr. Clenahan, then Mr. Bergdorf, then myself.
Thank you. I'm also a co-sponsor. Mr. Miller and I attended the same seminar where we watched the same video about a young girl dying that could have had a different outcome with a sprinkler system in a new house. We need to start somewhere. What's new construction now becomes old construction in a generation or two. 100 years from now, maybe 50% of our homes will have fire sprinklers in them if we pass this. So while it's very cost prohibitive to go to the buildings that have already been constructed, if we can catch them during construction, it's much more cost effective. It can be worked into the financing for the home the same way lawn sprinklers, the same way granite countertops, steel, stainless steel appliances, all of that is factored into the cost of a home. So I think in the long run, this is
mandatory cost though.
I couldn't afford any of those things when I bought my first house. Correct. And they can make choices about things that are not mandatory in order to fund paying for sprinkler systems that can also reduce their insurance expenses.
Mr. Clenahan?
Not really a comment so much as a request. Would it be possible to hear from the affected municipalities in terms of if there is a budget impact for them? I would like to know that going forward, particularly because as I read this, if the localities aren't willing to take this responsibility, it comes back to the county, and then there probably is a budget impact.
Sure.
So it'd be nice to
Mr. Miller?
at least give them, at least send a letter to them and give them at least the opportunity to weigh in.
Sure, that's reasonable. I mean, can you respond to Mr. Clenahan? Are you open to sending a letter to all, what are there, 22 municipalities in the county?
Who would that come from? 19 you're talking about, or from?
19.
Council's office.
Council's, okay. Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to Green Island.
I mean,
I think otherwise,
raise issues on it.
Because I think otherwise you probably have to do a fiscal impact statement, because we probably will need staff to do it here.
But except the fact that the impact is going to be refunded by the municipalities if that happens. So.
Well, we'd have to front the staff.
I mean,
you have to front it, yeah.
You need a budget line.
Yeah.
Mr. Who's next? Boom, boom, boom. Bergdorf, fine.
Couple of things on if we're talking about the merits of this, I spoke to two home builders, very large home builders, do a lot of business in Colony. It's where a lot of the home building is happening. They are also doing it in Bethlehem and Gilderland, which is where a lot of the home building is happening. And these two people told me that between the two of them, they built 400 homes in the last 4 years. They have offered an option to every single home buyer to put in sprinkler systems. It's not the $1.30 that everybody likes to quote from the Fire Institute. It's significantly greater. I am told by people who actually build homes that it's between $8,000 and $14,000. In some homes, it can be $25,000. So it's a massive increase on the house, on the price of new housing. In addition, there is no way.
Can they tell you who pays for that cost?
The homeowner pays for it.
So it's
an
passed
option. Sure it is. It's an option. There's no free lunch here. No grant programs for residential sprinkler systems.
First-time home buyer programs don't cover these costs?
If they give you $10,000 for a program, you know, you're all in. But then the other part of this legislation is there are no variances from it for a municipality. You have to do it. So I've talked to some people who are in the fire service in the hill towns and live in the hill towns. What do you do in an area which does not have a public water supply? Well, in order to have a certified sprinkler system, you have to build a very large tank. You have to enclose the tank. You have to fill it with enough well water or whatever. And they're saying that the cost of those systems can be $25,000 to $40,000. So we're creating a mandate for anyone who's not on public water. No,
I would only say this bill is also pending audit and finance.
Okay, but I mean, these are policies that I think are least effective under law. Audit and finance ought to be worried about what it's going to cost the county and the municipalities. So there's no variance away from that. So in essence, whatever the home price is in any place that doesn't have a public water system, forget about it. I got a letter from the deputy fire coordinator, who's a friend of mine, saying, please support this. And I said to him, could you point me to any one fireman, just one, that either bought a new house, a professional firefighter, or a volunteer firefighter who voluntarily decided that they were going to spend $14,000 to $20,000 to put in their sprinkler system, and I gotta know I'm not aware of that. So I mean, it's wonderful. I applaud all sorts of life safety efforts, but this has a tremendous impact. This could potentially. There are home builders who say they're going to be priced out of the market, and maybe that's a good thing. We stop development in the county. I don't know. Maybe that's the unintended consequence. But the fires, as Mr. Kraus said, are where code violations are, older buildings, etc. It's not so much in the new construction. So I'm.
Do you have a response to that, Mr. Miller? Then let's move to Mr. Fire. I really want to try to move this along.
Yeah, a couple
We're going to be here until 10 o'clock.
Somebody asked about where it's been implemented. It's the village of Irvington and the town of Greenburgh.
Okay.
And also, in response to this was put into the international codes to require mandate sprinklers in residential new construction at a national level, and it was pulled out of the codes in New York State when it came here. Other states have adopted, including the state of Maryland, who's had counties in Maryland who've had residential sprinkler requirements going back to the 1990s, and they haven't had any fatalities in buildings that were sprinklered where there was a fire, and there have been fires in those buildings. So when they pulled it out, there was trade-offs that were given in international codes that were left in the trade up, when they put this code in, building code in at the state level, they left the trade outside in, but they took out the sprinklers, so that's what we're trying to get back in.
Mr. Fine.
Okay, I'll be quick. I just want some more data on the cost, because I've heard a lot of variations from the $1.30 figure, but we've also heard that it can cost $10,000 to $15,000 on average for a home, and I think that's a big concern. My other concern is that in my district, for example, there are a lot of vacant buildings, vacant lots too. If you're building a new house on a vacant lot, the property values are low, and you're already going to spend more money than to build the house, and it's going to be worth once it's built. So if you're adding on additional costs, that's further hurting development in an area that needs it most.
Yeah, as far as the cost, I mean, there's a couple things that are going on here. One of them is that nobody, as Mr. Brodhoff pointed out, are putting sprinklers into the building, so the costs are just any number you want to pull out of the air until people start doing it. And obviously the cost is going to go down as more houses are built with sprinklers. And right now the only contractors I believe that are in the area that do sprinklers are union contractors. Most of the residential buildings are not built with union contractors. So my expectation is at some point in time, if this is enacted, that there will be non-union contractors who do sprinklers, and the cost will go down quickly to get down to $1.35 per square foot.
Okay, Mr. Miller, Mr. Clennahan had a request. Do you want to try to get that letter out to these municipalities? Table this for now. Come back with the letter next month. Get him an answer, and then we'll go from there.
I would rather move it out of committee if we can tonight for a vote. I mean, I'm willing to go to municipalities, but I think.
Okay, I mean, I would like some more information myself. I'm not prepared to support this.
We had the public hearing already, and nobody raised that issue before, including at the public hearing, the people did speak against it, so.
Respectfully, we can't assume the municipalities knew about it.
No.
We aren't always.
Other people knew about it.
We aren't always as effective as we'd like to be in
realtors
getting
about it, so.
getting our information out.
Mr. Bergdorf?
I would just like to say, if we're also going to ask municipalities, I would like to ask the county executive and the commissioner of the Department of Public Works to do an impact statement on what the potential costs are for the county. And
Well, it's also an audit finance, so.
Okay, well, I'll make the same request there.
All right, let me ask this, is there anybody who wants to make a motion to move the bill out?
I'll do it.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, there's a first and a second, all those in favor, raise your hands.
Aye.
2. All those opposed? 1,
Well
2,
done.
3, 4, 5, 6.
We tried.
Motion fails. Bill
It's a
that
good
vote-
try. Sticking
Just
neck out.
briefly, I'm not voting against the legislation necessarily, just the
But the
process
bill
I
is
would
still
like to
pending in
do.
committee. The motion was to move the bill out. That motion failed. The bill stays in committee. I would suggest, Mr. Miller, you go back and get the information Mr. Clennahan requested, and maybe you can convince him to push it out next month. All right, going back to Mr. Bullock's
What are we, 4?
bill, that's item number 4. All right, everybody has a copy of the handout now? Everybody had a chance to look at it. Doug, can you bring us through the amendment? This is on the
Sure.
paid sick leave bill?
Yep, paid sick leave, local law C, to provide access to paid sick time to qualified employers within Albany, employees and within Albany County. It amends section 4A3 to provide employees of an employer who employs 5 or fewer employees shall be entitled to earn and use up to 40 hours of unpaid sick time for all the purposes in section 5, period. And from then on, it's deleted the paragraph which combines statements of paid and unpaid sick leave and eventually builds up for employers with 5 or less employees. So that deletes that whole paragraph and only keeps the top sentence, okay? The purpose of this is to allow employees of an employer with fewer than 5 to earn and use up to 40 hours of unpaid sick time, but not paid sick time under the law. So what we're doing here is conceding to small businesses. I think it's a big concession in terms of paid sick leave. I still don't think it's gonna hurt them financially, even if they did this, but I'm willing to take this step as an amendment to ease the concerns on small businesses. I believe firmly that this is gonna help small businesses in their absentee rates, especially considering the epidemic that we have with people going to work sick. And it happens all over this country, which is amazing that employers don't automatically do this. But since they don't automatically do this, we're proposing this local law C to provide something not only for the employees, but for the employer, because in the long run, I believe it'll save them money.
So just real quick before I open it up for questions, Doug, is it your intention to table it tonight so folks can review this, or did you want to?
I want to vote on this amendment.
Well, the amendment, the amendment.
Keep the.
You don't need a vote to put this in. It's your local law. You can amend it as you see fit. You don't need to vote on that.
I don't need a vote? I'm
Right?
amending it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Mr. Bullock is
This
amending
is
his
the
local law
amendment.
to reflect this language, so everybody's clear. So we'll update it on the one that's on the website for the public. That being said, do you want to table it tonight?
I want to, table tonight. We're awaiting further amendments.
Another amendment?
Yes, we're awaiting further amendments that may happen.
May
And we will
Okay.
bring it into the next law committee
Alrighty.
meeting. Only responsible amendments will be accepted. But we're urging people to do it.
Okay, so that's the status tonight. We're gonna table it. Everybody has the amendment. We will reflect the local law to have the amendment in it in the next several days.
You know, there's a question, this is deleting a lot, Doug, so, is this gonna trigger another public hearing?
It's a substantive amendment. It has to. You have to have.
This is a
And then
substantive.
if you're gonna have a couple more substantive amendments.
Sure, well, for now,
So
we'll table.
we don't want to have too many hearings here.
Alright, so
We'll
Mr.
table it.
Brown, you had a question.
That was it, I was just going to say
haven't had
this,
it
I consider this a substantive amendment.
Okay.
And if there are more coming, obviously, you're right, you want to keep having public hearing after public hearing, so let's wait
Well, that's what he said.
until we get them all.
That's what he said. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on the amendment tonight?
Not on the amendment.
Does anybody have any questions on the amended local law tonight, or can we keep moving?
I have one question.
Ms. LaKay?
What is the best course of action if we would like to make some amendments? Do we give them to you? Do we rally each other? Do we get 10 people to support them and then give them to you? What process shall we follow to? Because all the emails were driving me nuts today. You would say yes to this one, another one would come and say, no, it's 40 hours. No, it's 10 people. No, it's 46 people. Yes, it is very lovely. But I thought we were going to talk tonight. Clearly, it's too late to do that. So, what shall we do?
This is it for tonight. You want to submit changes and amendments to me? I'll be happy to look at them.
All right.
Anything else? Otherwise, we're gonna table item number 4 and keep plowing forward.
11.
Okay, alright, so item number 4 is tabled at the request of the sponsor. Item number 5, local law number F. This is the anti-nepotism, which tabling this, the sponsor is not here. Item number 6, public hearing on local law number G.
Mr. Chair, I'll table 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Okay. That being said, table.
You get a vote put in your pocket on that one.
That being said, local law number E is not in the agenda for whatever reason. This is the conversion therapy local law that Mr. Clenahan sponsors. We had a public hearing on it. It's not in the agenda. He would like to move it out of committee. I understand members might want to actually physically see it here. I don't have a problem with this.
I thought we did.
There's-
We didn't vote on that?
I thought we voted on it.
I thought you voted on it.
We voted on it, health committee didn't, it's still in health committee, and mistakenly was left off this agenda.
Huh, I thought the whole legislature voted on it.
Not yet.
There's a
Public hearing?
health.
Okay, well,
We have no objection.
so unanimous consent? Okay. All right, because technically, it's not in here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move it out. I'm gonna call another special law committee meeting immediately after the public forum. We'll set the agenda so that we're dotting all our i's, crossing all our t's. It'll take 30 seconds. That way, legally, we're doing it the right way. Is that okay?
Definitely.
Great.
Do you want to bring a
All
side up
Why do you
issue,
have to
but this is the complication that comes when things are referred to too many committees?
right. I don't disagree. So E, we will call a special committee of the law committee. Got it? Got it. Just on this one issue.
Thank you.
Thank God. All right, 10 we did. 11, local law Jag, Mr. Fine, petroleum storage tanks.
I'm gonna table it still in discussions with,
Oil people?
global, over the coastal area, so.
Item number 12, resolution 227, Fair Hotel Consumer Practices Law. Mr. Cunningham?
Mr. Bullock and I will table this first. One more month.
One more month? Okay. 13 we did. 14, Mr. Mendick. You've been here a long time.
I have, waiting patiently. You just go over to the hot seat here.
So let me just, 14, 15, and 16 are, let me ask you a question. Why are we not doing these through the Rules Reform Task Force?
Well, 15 and 16 are kind of outside, they're more committee
Okay.
procedures
Okay.
than the rules. If you'd like, we can take those two first.
Whatever you want.
Okay. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do 15 and 16?
Okay.
Because they're really kind of tied together, and they're not part of the rules task force. And the intent is to speed up the process. We've all sat in committees for probably too long, and we see month after month after month that things are getting tabled because the sponsor is not here, we don't have the information, blah, blah, blah. We've seen it. And what these two procedures, or these two resolutions are trying to do, 237 is really saying that we should allow for more than a singular prime sponsor. And this allows for up to 5 prime sponsors. Well, I think it's prime the prime sponsor plus 4, I believe.
Okay.
So that when we come to a meeting like this, that
Drake's not here, somebody else is on.
somebody else who's a prime sponsor has to be up to speed, and they can answer the questions, and they can, we can move it along. It just happens far too often.
I don't disagree.
So that's all that's meant to do, is to add additional sponsors.
Mr. Kraus, Mr. Cunningham.
Mr. Mendick.
Yes, sir.
In one of the resolves here, you say that at the written designation of the introductory sponsor,
right,
all resolutions and local laws may have up to 4 additional prime sponsors who basically may act for the introductory sponsor.
Correct.
So those 4, or however many, 2 or 3, 4, need to have something written from the introductory sponsor saying you can be on as a prime sponsor and such, you now have the authority to act upon the bill?
I think the intent was, and I don't, I'm trying not to add a whole lot more paperwork, but that when it gets to this resolution stage, that the introductory plus the prime sponsors are going to be in capitals, so that will not be submitted until that designation has taken place, so that all the committee members now know who is eligible to speak on that resolution or local law.
Right. So if I'm the introductory sponsor and Mr. Bergdorf says, I would like to be on the bill with you, I'd like to be a prime sponsor with you, I can say, yes, I'd like to have you on as a prime sponsor, or no, but you're welcome to be a sponsor.
Right.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I have no problem.
Mr. Cunningham.
Really quick, I very much support this.
Very quick.
Hey, first time for everything. I think the reasons you said are very true, because multiple people should be able to move it in delays otherwise, particularly as we saw with the last local law, that there are multiple referrals to different committees, and it drags out the process. And also, it's been at least twice in the last few years where there have been competing pieces of legislation, and a third one tonight that you guys are moving for. Ms. Lakakis and Ms. Cunningham and I had a pay equity thing that we had different versions. We talked and sat together and agreed on one version, and we were all primes. The same thing happened with Mr. Malowitz and I on a pet store rules and regulations bill a few years ago. If you don't have a process that allows for multiple prime sponsors, it discourages that kind of negotiation and forces people to go forward with multiple conflicting legislation, which may not be all that different. So this is, to me, very positive overall.
Any other questions?
Just one quick comment. The way they do it in Congress is call it an original co-sponsor, and then everybody else is just a co-sponsor.
Yeah, we call them primes in the state.
So,
Just a thought.
The nomenclature is not really important, the concept is.
but I love the concept. It's
Thank
a
you.
great idea.
Are there any other?
There's one part about it that I do like, and that is the fact that the original prime sponsor gets to determine who in effect is his or her agent. Because what you don't want to have happen is you get to a committee structure and somebody says, well, would you consider an amendment that does X, Y, and Z? And somebody says, yes, and then the original sponsor says, I would have never, so they're.
But you can still have that happen.
Well.
You can still have that happen.
All right, item number 15.
You can, but at least
Any other
someone is.
questions on item number 15?
We do have boldface type, just for the record.
I have a
It doesn't have to
motion
be
to move
caps
item
all the time
number 15.
anymore.
Mr. Clennahan, seconded by Mr. Bergdorf, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, 15's out.
Great, let's move on to 16. 16 has the same type of objective. We have seen for years, we have items that are on the agenda that never get discussed. They just sit there and sit there and sit there until the end of the session when they get taken off. What this will do is it will provide a timetable. You have 90 days with which to bring your issue to the committee, discuss it, and act on it. If that does not take place within 90 days, it will be considered inactive and taken off of the agenda. Now, let's say that you are working on it and you still have issues, you're still trying to get information. The committee then can vote to allow for an additional 45-day period in order to get all the information that you need. So we're now sitting then at 135 days. I don't know too many issues that we deal with that if you're really interested and you're really putting in the work, you can't get resolved in 135 days. So that's what this is trying to accomplish.
I just have one question.
Yes, sir.
What if you have a bill, like like Mr. Clennahan said, multiple committees. So say I'm working on the issue in law for month after month after month, but I don't bother to go to the health committee because I'm still trying to fine tune it in law. What happens in that ancillary committee?
It's a good point, which I had not considered. Because
do you want to address that?
I probably. Did you have a point, Jim?
No, I was just going to add when I was helping Rich with this, inactivity shall be defined as when a local law resolution has not been attempted to be moved by its sponsor for a vote by a committee. So by the language under your scenario, if someone had tried to move it in health, it would be okay, or in law, sorry, but not health, it would be okay. But if they hadn't attempted to move it by a committee, not all, right? That was the concept.
Okay, hey, good job. That's good bill drafting. Clennahan, fine.
The good times are over. I've got a problem with this one because I do think there are situations where you want to get something in, you want to make an initial point of it and get the issue out there, but there may be difficulty in fine-tuning things and negotiating things and maybe trying to get experts in terms of advocates who may have the real expertise in the issue and are not always easy to get to weigh in or to sit down with and talk with. I don't like the idea of an artificial time frame which forces things out because I can see that it would force something out prematurely. Maybe something needs more work. Maybe you're waiting to hear from advocates groups to really weigh in and they're not always easy to get a hold of. We've had trouble getting a hold of some of our labor allies on certain issues. It's not always easy to get that input that you need and you don't really want to force something out prematurely or face having to have it ruled inactive and withdrawn altogether.
But here's the catch, the way that we have resolved that. If it is ruled inactive and taken off the agenda, then you can just reintroduce it. It does not preclude you from doing that. So let's say that you have that issue, and it's going to take you, 9 months or a year to gather all the information. It's off of the agenda. You can continue to work on it. Once you got everything you need, just reintroduce it.
But what does that accomplish then? So you have to go through a whole new process again. You've got to wait to get reintroduced, reassigned to a committee. I'm not sure that inactive things are what are slowing down these agendas.
Well,
the inactive things are tabled and we move on. I don't think it makes for a long agenda, but I don't think it's making a long paper agenda, but I don't think it's making for long meetings.
Let me make 2 points. First of all, to reintroduce this after all the legwork has been done is not a lot of effort. Everything has been done. It's just a matter of reintroducing, and it goes back to committee, and it goes back to the committee now fully with full explanation so it can be properly vetted. Part of the attempt here was that my own personal experience is that people will put things on the agenda and they just don't work on them. You know, it's just a placeholder. And it's one thing if you're working on it, but it's a whole nother thing if it's there, and it's somewhere when you're getting, you know, somewhere when we're getting close to the end of the session, and you've only got 3 months to do that, all of a sudden, these things all pop up. And it's just because the effort hadn't been made. This forces both the committee as well as the primary sponsor to do their due diligence, to get the information that the committee would need to make a decision, and the committee then can vote on it and move it forward.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Fine?
I was just gonna say I agree with Brian, I won't say anything else.
Okay. Mr. Mendick, do you want to address any of the concerns raised by Mr. Klein, or do you want to vote tonight?
I think I just did, and
Okay.
I have no problem putting this to a vote.
Okay. Do I have a motion to move this out with a favorable recommendation?
So moved for a vote.
Is there a second? Move it out.
I'll second it for a vote.
It's seconded for a vote. All in favor of moving this out of committee, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's deadlocked, so I cannot move it out.
Right.
Do you want to put a motion up for an unfavorable, negative recommendation?
Why don't we do with no recommendation?
No recommendation? All right. Is there a motion?
Can I, before we make a motion? I think this is a really good concept. I think people are a little concerned about 90 and 45. Is there...
Different time frame that might work, yeah.
I mean, what if we changed the 145-day extension to 245 days extensions? So you got 90 and 90, that's 180 days, that's, you know,
That's up to the
half
sponsor.
a year. Well, I mean, I'm just wondering if that would give people more comfort.
I mean, that's, address your fellow committee members.
Would that give all of you more comfort?
I don't love this because we just went through a redistricting exercise and it literally took 2 years. So there are circumstances where you're knee-deep in stuff. And it's not, you know, those aren't the typical circumstances, but they do occur.
And I
So the
agree.
timeframes are, but I wonder if there's a way you could redraft to also offer the committees of jurisdiction the opportunity to say, in those select circumstances, yeah, we don't want to lose these bills.
Let me ask a question, if I may.
Sure.
In your 2-year process, would there have been any problem for you to have withdrawn that resolution or local law and brought it back now that you have, you know, more consensus and you feel it's closer to your end product?
I wouldn't have wanted to do that.
For what reason?
Well, the reason is that we established these markers, and I think we both felt very strongly about what these markers looked like. And I think we wanted them sort of in the public domain as discussion items and so forth. So, you know, the fact that they were on agendas for, you know, many months and tabled quickly, wasn't cluttering up any time or anything. It was just a quick, as Brian said, a quick motion to table. It took 2 seconds, and we indicated we're still working together. It also sent signals to our colleagues that we were working together, because we always said, nope, still working together, we'll table both of them.
Do you want to table this, Mr. Mendick, for now, or do you want to try, I mean, it doesn't look like the votes are here to move this out.
Okay, let me table it. Let me see if we can come to some other agreement. Again, my intent here is so that that we don't have bills languish on the agenda and they're not being worked on.
Okay. All right, so we'll table this now.
14.
You can
14.
work on it, come
Yep.
back, I guess.
Okay.
Now we'll move to 14.
All right.
We're still here.
14
We're
is...
still here.
Yeah. 14 is the first submission by the Rules Task Force. And this submission was to take care of a lot of small pieces. For example, in the rules as they currently state, everybody needs to get written notice to your post office box of meetings. Okay? Well, we don't do that anymore, and we shouldn't be doing it anymore because we have electronics capabilities. So we added that electronics capability in there. One of the things, and that happens in a number of sections, okay? The other thing that we tried to do is to add, to integrate practices that are currently in effect. And I think the perfect example is under special meetings, and it's the last item. We normally, when we have public comment, we have in the past always allowed for questions of clarification. Well, the rules do not call for that. So what this change does is add back in the ability to ask a question for clarification. Again, all we're trying to do is say, that's what we've always done, let's just get it in the rules and make it official.
That question isn't in the rules?
It is not.
Okay.
In fact, it actually, to the negative, there will be no questions. It is that specific.
Mr. Mendick, on this, just the section dealing with rule or legislation and procedure, local laws are required in the municipal home rule law to be lettered.
Yes.
State law requires that, so I think there needs. What?
The issue with the resolution.
Yeah, go right ahead, spit it out.
So, Mr. Mendick,
Sorry, I don't mean to say it like that, I'm getting a little testy.
Under the municipal homeroom law, you can't delete this issue of resolutions having a title concisely stating the subject matter. That's in the municipal homeroom law. You need that for resolutions. So deleting that is contrary to the municipal homeroom law.
Let me ask you a question.
Home rule law, I said homeroom, home rule law.
It's in there twice, though.
Sure.
It's in the first sentence, and then
Okay.
it's there as its own. It was attempting to just remove duplicitous language. It wasn't trying to remove it.
Again, what we're trying to do with the whole local law thing, we all struggle every month with saying, okay, it's local law O, it's local law A. I don't know what the hell it is. I mean, just let's put a concise, description of it so we know it's, the sprinkler law, or it's, it's the.
You still gotta have the letter though, that's the problem.
Still have to have the letter, absolutely. Yeah.
That's a
Mr.
good
Fine.
one for the
Well, I
rules
think
committee.
that makes sense in a way. A lot of people choose to name their laws, with a short title. I think it makes sense to have the local law, actually, that was actually called the Albany County Fair Chance Act. But for example, the Albany County Fair Chance Act was local law N. I think it would make sense for it to have said local law N dash Fair Chance Act.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
To
Yeah,
put that up top if you choose to name it.
And that's what we're
should be an
intending to
option,
do.
because not everyone chooses to.
No, but it's not for the sponsor's benefit, it's for the other 38 members, so they know what we're talking about.
Okay, what, do you wanna move this out tonight, do you wanna table this tonight?
No, I'd like to move it out. If you look at what we're doing here, these are all
really small little things.
Small little things, just trying to get things up to date.
Sure, we need to amend the
There's
section.
one is not new, I think.
We need to amend the section about the, numbering.
And again, that's required by SILA, you cannot change that, bottom line.
It's just,
The lettering must
It's just
be
in there
on
twice.
these local laws.
It's in there
Under
twice.
state
That's
law,
all I'm
that's
trying to say.
Okay.
for reasons of when
It's
it
in there
gets to the
twice.
Secretary of State.
You're saying it has a letter.
No, here it says consecutively numbered.
It says consecutively numbered.
Yeah, I would suggest, Mr.
You see it's been
Mendick,
changed.
that you, under Rule 11, legislative procedure, you say each resolution and local law shall be consecutively numbered, new language underscored, and if a local law shall be lettered.
No, it has to be.
Shall be,
Right, sure.
shall be lettered.
Entitled.
How about each resolution shall be numbered and each local law shall be lettered?
Entitled.
And the title
Title.
of each shall state.
Well,
I have
in
the title on there.
it doesn't say it right now.
in the last paragraph on the page that.
I see you have it down there too.
Yeah,
I'm saying let's just put it back in so it's consistent.
gotcha.
Yeah.
You can even use that same language at the top here.
Gotcha.
I have a question. Is that part about the people not living in the county going first? Is that practice, do we practice that now?
That is not enough.
Wasn't that in here?
Mr.
Did I-
Klein,
I did have a question on that.
It is in there. I thought I
And I
just
raised
read
this
it.
with Mr. Dawson last year and he had some similar
concepts.
That's kind of where I got it.
And he yelled at me.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, residents of Albany County shall have preference to speak before non-residents when addressing items on the agenda. They also have preference when addressing not on the agenda, but not before non-residents have spoken regarding. So you get residents, and then lobbyists, and then residents again.
My question is, what's a resident? A resident, in a simple definition, is obvious, but what if you're an organization, say Environmental Advocates of New York, are you a resident because you're located in Albany County? Then what about Riverkeeper? They're not located here, but they have substantial membership that they speak for here. Are they a resident? And then a third kind of funky idea is, are you a resident? You get resident benefit if you're speaking for a resident. And I'm thinking of Renee Barchida from the nursing home, who didn't live in Albany County a lot of the time, but her mom was a resident of Albany County nursing home. I'm speaking on her behalf, so I think we need to define what a resident is to kind of deal with those questions. And you become, I mean, say you're a Dart Corporation. Do you become a resident because you hire an Albany County lobbyist? I don't know.
Yeah. And this is my own personal opinion, but, you know, it's something for us to discuss. I would think a resident is someone who resides in the county, not where their business is specifically, but, you know, a person who's resident. Now, what this says is that they still get the opportunity to speak. They just aren't the first ones on the, you know, out of the bandbox. So if you have an agenda item, you want to have people who reside, who live in the county, they get an opportunity to speak. The next group would be those people who do not live in the county, and they're speaking on agenda items. So whether it's a lobbyist, whether your business is there, they still get the opportunity. It's just a matter of trying to prioritize. And what happens in this case is that as we have seen a number of times, we get into a situation where we have people who are speaking on non-agenda items. The agenda might be, you know, 2 months from now, might have been passed. You want to know, if we're going to run out of time, those are the people you want to have on the bottom of the list. And especially if they're non-residents.
Respectfully, though, I'm not sure the answer is any of my questions.
Oh, okay.
I mean, is Renee Barchida a non-resident or a resident?
Does she live in the county?
No.
She does not. Then she becomes a non-resident.
So
and if she's speaking on a non-agenda item, she's further down the list.
Even though she's speaking on behalf of her mom, who is an Albany County resident, who is physically unable to speak. Yes. That's problematic.
Yeah. I have another question too, because when this was originally negotiated and passed by the legislature, I felt very strongly that a business in Albany County was a resident. So that if somebody was speaking on behalf of a business, if the owner lived in Niskayuna but had a business on Broadway in Albany where he employed or she employed 200 people, you are potentially impacting something that they own that employs hundreds of people.
Absolutely.
That language was in our compromise. It defined resident, including a business. Did that continue? Is that language in here?
No, it is not. Now, let me be very, very clear. I don't come to this meeting thinking everybody's going to love all these items. This is meant to be, to put it out and say, okay, this is our initial thinking. Tell me how you feel about it so we can make the necessary changes. Because I don't think there's anything...
You're going to table this?
I'll be happy to table it, but I'd like to get more input.
Okay, so that being said,
okay,
we're going to table this at Mr. Reddick's request. If people have suggestions on the language, please get it to the sponsors.
Right.
So that next month when we're here and he wants to move it, everybody knows that, you know, he asked, and if he doesn't get anything from folks, you know, that's on us, the people that have concerns. So we're going to table this and move on.
Very good.
No offense.
Thank you.
All right. Good job.
Thank you.
It's a lot of work. Okay. We're 14, table. 18, local law number L. Holly Starry. He's not here.
17.
Table 18, 7. I have to go back to 17. Local law number K. Albany County Fair Hotel Consumer Practices Law.
I will table.
Tabling. Item number 19, local law number N. This is the downsizing. This is being tabled by me, subject to public hearing tomorrow. 20 we did. I believe that completes tonight's work. Is there any further business anybody wants to speak of? Motion to adjourn.
It's already.